Hi there! If I were to ask you what the most underrated aspect of Genshin's combat system is, what would you say? Resistance Shred? Depth Shred? Level 90? Talents? These are all good answers, but in my opinion, the answer is obvious. Off-field elemental application. We see it time and time again. You'd think after Kokomi released and we saw how valuable her off-field application was, we would have learned from our mistakes. But then we got Kuki. Shortly after that, we got Layla. It seems we never learn. Every time we get a unit that does consistent elemental application with their skill instead of their burst, the only thing anyone seems to care about is the fact that they don't do a lot of damage with those skills. The thing is, we're kinda missing the point with these characters. Damage of their abilities isn't what makes them good. They'd be good even if they didn't do damage. Just the fact that you can hit a button, swap out, and get consistent elemental application makes them invaluable to team building. Introducing Nilou, a unit that can apply Hydro to an enemy once every 2 seconds while her skill is active, even while off field with her skill, and is guaranteed to do so the first time she comes in contact with an enemy. Meaning, the more enemies there are, the more application you get. Does it do any damage? No, it doesn't have to. As you can see here, when the application is fast enough, it becomes an aura on the enemy. When there's an aura on the enemy, it allows the next element to come in contact with that enemy to trigger a reaction. The aura application doesn't have to do any damage in order for whomever you're using to trigger amplifying reactions to get the bonus for their reaction. Conversely, if the element is slow enough, it can be used to trigger transformative reactions that don't care if the application did damage. All that matters for transformative reactions is that 2 elements come together and the reaction deals damage based on the character's level and elemental mastery. I think it's about time we bury this trend of burying units with consistent application only to end up with our feet in our mouths. So I decided to do something crazy. I was going to clear floors 9 through 12 of the Spiral Abyss with a level 20 Nilou. For floor 9, I went with something really wacky. A big issue with Nilou's Bountiful Core team is obviously the self-damage, but I had a thought. What if I could outrun the blooms? You see, Kale's skill has this unique mechanic that causes her boomerang to follow you for a really long time. So you can throw out her skill, dash with Yelan, and tag enemies with Yelan's skill. After you tag them, the boomerang will hit them with Dendro. When you end Yelan's skill, it'll apply Hydro and trigger a bloom. Now, since Nilou is level 20, we don't have her last passive unlocked, so the blooms won't be doing much damage. This is more of a proof of concept than anything, which is why we're doing it in floor 9. Here's the basic idea. Take a picture with Nahida, activate Nilou's skill, throw a boomerang with Kale, and run through enemies with Yelan. Nilou will trigger blooms as we're going through, then Kale will refresh the Dendro, then Yelan's skill ends triggering blooms again. We get in, we get out, no one gets hurt, except our enemies. The Nilou community calls non-healer teams Toaster Oven because of the self-damage, but since it's a non-healer team designed to avoid it, I've got to give thanks to my Twitch chat for this team's name, Sonic Bloom. Real quick, I want to make it perfectly clear that this is not build advice. If you don't have the stuff to invest into the characters for these teams, then just give it a pass for now and enjoy the show. But if you do have the stuff, go ahead and try it out. It's pretty fun. For this team, Yelan's purpose was only to get near enemies for Nilou to trigger blooms and to trigger the second wave of blooms with her skill, and I wasn't going to use her burst. So I sacrificed most of her damage to give her stringless and 4-piece Gilded Dreams with triple EM. Nahida had her signature weapon and EM Dendro crit with Deepwood. Nilou was on 2-piece HP with triple HP and Iron Sting. Keep in mind she was only level 20 and hadn't unlocked her A4 passive, so her blooms weren't going to be doing a lot of damage. And Kale was on whatever spare Deepwood pieces I had lying around with Fav. The rotation I tried to go for was Nahida's skill and burst, Nilou burst followed by her skill and 3 more skills, or skill, 2 normal attacks, and her skill. Kale's skill, and then hold Yelan's skill to dash through all the enemies. Things to get a little scuffed because Nahida kept murdering everything. But that's actually a good thing. That tells me I was proccing seeds often enough to trigger her skill, which means I had pretty good ownership of the reaction with my Hydro units. That meant it was safe for me to get the extra Dendro application from Kali's burst without worrying about her stealing blooms. Who knows, maybe once Nilou is fully invested into, I'll give this team a go for real. Introducing Idol Meet! Meeting your favorite idols is a special occasion you'll want to cherish forever. That's why we have our on-site photographer Nahida to set the stage and capture all the best moments from our idol's adoring fans. Nilou specializes in choreography and really brings our performances alive. She's new to the industry, so she stacks herself with HP so she can keep up with the fervor of her adoring fans. Barbara is our lead singer, and she may not have much fashion sense, but when you're that cute, you can look good in anything. Lastly, some fans can take things a little too far. We know that's not you, but for those other fans that try to get a little too close to our favorite idols, we brought Kuki Shinobu to administer a controlled shock if needed. Get out there, Barbara. Yes, that's it. The fans love it. They're so enamored they're dropping green blobs everywhere. But littering is bad. Go make sure all those green blobs make their way back to their owners. The most treasured moment in any idol meet is when fans get to shake the hands of their beloved idols. So it's important to make sure you get to see each of your fans face to face at least once. Now, some fans are a little shy, so it's really important that you go out of your way to make them feel loved. This will help develop an unhealthy obsession with you that may lead them to stalking or even kidnapping you. But these are also the types of fans that spend the most money on merch. So, as a corporate entity, we'll do anything in our power to make sure you enable that obsession. And if you don't, we'll just replace you with a younger model and you'll wind up being the butt of a creepy middle-aged man's jokes on a weird game show until you eventually die in obscurity. Now, get out there and give it your all. Minasan, konbanwa. I said, give it your all. Irashai. Try harder. とてもにありがとうございました。He said harder. よろしくね。よろしくね。皆さん大好き。Why am I like this? Well, that went a little off the rails. Anyway, Nahida is on EM Dendro crit, deep whip with an EM or crit weapon. It doesn't even matter what you do, Barbara and Nilou. They're just there to apply Hydro. Kuki is on triple EM Gilded Dreams with an EM weapon. All you'll want to do in this team is tag enemies with Nahida's skill, use her burst, then Kuki skill, then skill with Barbara, followed by 4 skills with Nilou because you aren't allowed to hit your fans, and then run around and apply Hydro to enemies to make sure Kuki's skill hits the seeds. For this next team, I tried a Sauté comp with Nilou as my Hydro unit. Since she's the dancer, I called the team Adumu. Sauté means jump in French, and Adumu is an African jumping dance. Look, I spent like 3 whole seconds trying to come up with something better. I tried. Kind of. Don't judge. Anyway, this team had some problems. Putting Nahida, Bennett, and an animal unit together is a recipe for burning, and burning applies Pyro faster than Nilou applies Hydro. That meant if I triggered burning, Nilou's skill, which does no damage, would be vaping, for no damage. To avoid that, I tried to infuse Kazu's burst with Hydro to try and limit the amount of Pyro we'd be applying to enemies. Results were inconsistent at best. Fortunately, since Nilou's burst hit twice fairly quickly, it's a pretty reliable way to clear burning when it's up. Unfortunately, it wasn't up a lot because I went for Sack Sword on Kazuha to pretend I had C1. Also, because of Sack Sword instead of Fav on Kazuha, I had to give Benny Fav to meet his ER requirements. Honestly, this is less of a Sauté team and more of a pretty consistent way to vape both hits of Nilou's burst. But there were some virgins, so I'll let it pass. Also, unfortunately, I saved the wrong clip for Chamber 3, so I had to go back and get the footage again. However, by the time I realized it, I had already got my Nilou to 70. So she'll be at level 70 for the Chamber 3 clip. But I promise I did complete it with her at level 20. It doesn't really change her functionality here outside of adding some damage to her burst, which is at talent level 1. My user ID is on screen. You can check my Abyss Chronicle through Hoya Lab if you aren't convinced. Really dropped the ball here. I'm sorry about that. Also, if it wasn't clear, this team just didn't work the way I wanted it to. I've tried a few different rotations, but more often than not, it just ends up as a burning team. So any rotations and builds I could give you probably just won't work. However, if you're into vape Nilou one-shots, this may just be a team you want to mess around with. Just keep in mind that one-shot comps can be pretty satisfying in the overworld, but more often than not, they just won't work in Abyss at all. Now it was time for Abyss 12. I went with the standard Ayaka Shinra Freeze team with Nilou as my Hydro unit, and affectionately dubbed it Better Than Mona, because Nilou's Hydro application is just that, better than Mona's. Just too bad she can't hold TTDS. Unfortunately, as I'd come to realize, I was going to face the hardest issue to overcome in Genshin. Heal issue. I just suck at grouping enemies for Ayaka and Freeze. There's no way around it. I spent about 6 hours trying to pull this off, and it just wasn't happening. Plus, this would have been awful against the Kenkis. That said, this is actually a pretty solid way to play Freeze. My rotations are kind of scuffed because the only other Freeze team I've ever played was with Layla and Xingqiu, and you really don't even have to think when they're paired together. It's been a common running theme that I just can't pull cryo units, so I was determined to break that curse on the Ayaka Shinra banner, and I haven't really had the practice to really get the most out of the team. Admittedly, I was feeling myself a bit too hard expecting to be able to do Abyss 12 with the team I didn't have a lot of practice with, so I had to go back to the drawing board. And this is what I came up with. Yes, I know what you're thinking, and no, I didn't put Nilou in the team and never swapped her. She was actually a pretty important factor in making this work, because I brought Yelan instead of Xingqiu because I needed a bow for the Aeon Blade Drake. As you'll see later, it would have been impossible to clear without actually using Nilou. In my first attempt, the Nilou Hyper Bloom team managed to clear in 1 minute and 16 seconds, but I was about to encounter a problem. Alright, good enough. There should be plenty of time. That's the big issue out of the way there. As it turns out, I was wrong. The issue wasn't the Nilou team, it was the Raiden team. Time and time again, I'd have to reset because someone would die. First, it was Fischl. No! Funny that the Nilou side is the one that we didn't give us trouble. Isn't that something? That's actually been the story. That's actually been the story. It's the other side has been the one that's given me trouble. But I wasn't deterred. I recollected myself and went for a second attempt. This time around, I lost a bit of time over the last run, but this is also where we started to see the magic of having Nilou as my 4th slot here. You see, I went for an HP Hydro crit build with Yelan and Aqua Simulacra, and because of that, there were times I just couldn't get her burst off cooldown. I had considered giving her Fav or an ER Sans instead, but as we'll see later, sacrificing the damage for those options very well could have made it impossible to clear in time. That meant that there are decent sized portions of these runs where Nilou was my only source of Hydro application, and that a lot of the Hyper Bloom damage was thanks to her creating cores. Another thing I learned was that Nilou's skill is actually incredible at breaking the sigils created by the Consecrated Beast. They break almost immediately after appearing. All that combined, and I managed a respectable 1 minute and 23 second clear time on the first chamber for my second attempt. There we go. Yeah, Nilou can only carry the team so far. The level 20 Nilou. Yeah, my C2 Raiden needs to pull her own weight. So, as it turns out, I may have fibbed a tiny bit earlier. Earlier I said I suck at grouping enemies for Ayaka's burst and freeze. It turns out I don't suck at grouping enemies for Ayaka, I just suck at grouping enemies for Kasaha. The first phase went pretty well. I managed to clear all the shroom buddies in less than a full rotation. After that, I went for the Kairagi. I set everything up, and to my utter dismay, at the last second, one of them dashed out of Raiden's burst, and I thought I was going to have to reset again. Don't you f***ing do it! Don't you f***ing do it! Got him. After that, it was just a battle to stay inside of Bennett's burst. The consecrated beasts are so insanely aggressive that that's easier said than done. Truth be told, a reason I was skeptical about bringing Yelan over Xingqiu for the Nilou side was that I knew I was going to need his resistance and interruption for them. But once again, thanks to Nilou's passive Hydra application, even if I was getting staggered to Kingdom Come, I knew I'd still be generating seeds if I couldn't do normal attacks to drive Yelan. Had Nilou not been there, I wouldn't even have had a lot of Hydra application while Yelan's burst was active, because I wouldn't have been able to do many normal attacks. But we managed to get through with 8 seconds remaining on our second attempt, and I thought we'd weathered the storm. Got it. Alright. From here on out, it should be easier. It should be easier from now on. That was the tough part. That was the tough part. Go with this one. Ooh, Cookie's kind of hurt. Take note of that. It'll be relevant later. From here, we move on to the Aeon Blade Drake, and this is where Yelan's energy problems really started to show. In this chamber, Nilou was responsible for creating the majority of the seeds that were hyperbloomed. There was even a moment where she generated 3 seeds at once, and I have no idea how. On top of that, those 3 seeds somehow managed to avoid being triggered all at once. Normally, if you have 3 seeds near each other, all of them will trigger at once, but only 2 will do damage. Somehow, the stars aligned and one of the seeds avoided being triggered. All in all, I ended up clearing the first half in 1 minute and 23 seconds, and I was going to need every frame of the remaining 97 seconds if I wanted to clear the second half on my first attempt. Oh, we let her get some healing in. One more thing, don't you just hate it whenever you're just a sliver away from defeating the enemy and they go into some kind of invulnerable phase or untargetable phase or some phase where it's hard to hit them and do damage? It's just absolutely obnoxious. So close here. We would have had such a good time if you hadn't have taken off it right that second. There we go. Alright, this side. Oh, Bennett's so hurt. Oh no! This side was kind of awkward for the Raiden team. I failed to group any of the enemies with my first rotation and was forced to just focus on bursting down one at a time. I managed to group 2 in the second rotation, and lucky for me, the archer thought that the Muso no Hitotachi looked fun and came to play on his own accord. Keep in mind, this was my first time ever doing this half, so I didn't really have a strategy for how to go about doing it effectively either. After the second rotation, 1 Hilichurl remained, but I didn't want to use Raiden's burst because I knew I'd need the initial damage on the Anemo Eremite summoner. It's moments like these where I'm glad she has an attack goblet and is triple crowned. After our first burst, everyone came to join the party on their own. Enemy RNG was working out in my favor, or so I thought. While finishing off the last summoner, I panned the camera over and had a terrifying realization. I'll let my response from the stream speak for itself. Oh no, she's not even hurt. Did we do it? Yes! Yes! What a clutch Rhino! What a clutch Rhino! Holy sh! I would have been, like, if I had missed it, I would have been upset because we would have had to go through again. That was really gambling going for that ult instead of resetting. That was really gambling. It was finally time for Chamber 3, but it didn't start well. Oh, Kookie died. It's fine. It's fine. We don't need Kookie. We don't need her. Our next attempt was a 1 minute and 43 second clear, right, but that was the least of our problems. Oh. Once again, it's the Raiden team. Once again, it's the Raiden team that's holding us back. It's the Raiden team that's holding us back. We'd get a minute and 12 second clear, and then tragedy would strike again. Oh, this time it was Raiden. This time it was Raiden. On the next run, we cleared in a minute and 19 seconds, but then Bennett died. Again. Raiden's just not pulling her own weight. Come on, Raiden, you're C2. Do your job. Then we got a really good 1 minute and 9 second clear time. More like C poo poo. Bennett died again. We came back and got a 1 minute and 10 second clear time. You know, like the fact that I can do the EEE Nilou and still be applying, like, so like bringing Yelan with an HP Hydro crit build has made it tough to have her burst. So being able to Nilou and EEE and still get that Hydro application in there, that's been pretty nice. I'm not gonna lie. Nilou's actually pulling her own weight here. Not Copium. I just wish Raiden would. Oh my god, she still died inside a Bennett burst. The Raiden team is what's holding us back. It's the Raiden team. 100% the Raiden team. By now, it wasn't a question of if we would 36-star Abyss with a level 20 Nilou, but when. All in all, there were 7 resets in Abyss 12, and only one of them was from the Nilou team. And it wasn't even her, the level 20 character fighting level 97 plus enemies that requires a lot of field time for his skill that died. Also, it's embarrassing to admit, but the reason I was doing E-spam for Nilou's skill was because I was worried I'd accidentally do a third normal attack. It wasn't until the very end that I realized when Yelan has her burst, doing E into E would trigger Yelan. It's faster anyway and thus better for your rotations. But if I accidentally did the third normal, I wouldn't get any off-field application. I went through the entire Abyss without realizing it and felt really dumb. Here's the thing though, I always knew this was going to work because Hyper Bloom is just that friggin' good. However, what I was surprised to see was that Nilou was really pulling her own weight out there with the seed generation. I know this sounds crazy, and I might get crucified for saying this, but if you don't have a good healer for a Nilou team and don't have Yelan, Nilou might actually be the next best option in Hyper Bloom for your 4th slot after Xingqiu in your Electro unit. Now was the moment of truth. I'd badmouthed Raiden enough, and she was tired of it. Things started off a little rough. Skill issue showed up again with Kazuha, and I whiffed with this skill and didn't generate particles for him or Bennett, causing neither of them to have their burst. I had to tiptoe around to get an extra skill in with Bennett to get his burst up, and he almost died. The cryo field cleared the pyro from his burst, so I was able to skill and burst with Kazuha and still swirl Electro despite Bennett being C6. Raiden didn't have her burst when I swapped to her, and almost immediately after getting it, Bennett's burst ended. But I needed the damage and energy, so I took the risk and continued my rotation. Then, disaster struck. Bennett died, but I learned something in that moment. unlike most other characters, when Bennett goes down, his ability remains active. Bennett was dead, but that wasn't going to stop me. This was my moment. Got it. Got it. 36-star Abyss with Nilou. We done it. All that was left to do was to claim my rewards and celebrate the only way I know how. Oh, look, we don't have to send her. Well, here we go. Yeah, you missed her already. I got what I need. Level 20 Nilou. 36-star Abyss. Oh, baby Nilou. You were what I needed. Yep. Have a good one. Bye.